Hello, avid readers, book nerds, and casual observers, and welcome to the Read Along brought to you by the Lit Round Table. I'm Joseph.
And I'm Anna, and today we're talking about The Light of the Midnight Stars by Rena Rossner.
All right, welcome to the final part for Light of the Midnight Stars, part 20.
It's been an emotional journey, y'all.
It sure has. It's been a ride.
Yeah.
Lots of downs and slightly less down and then more down.
And then some real highlights.
Brief ups and then downs.
It's overall a very sad story.
It's very sad. I mean like emotionally, not like quality. Very, very quality story.
Yes, yes.
Just, man, what a bummer. So first we've got, tell us about this Esther character.
Yeah, so we have our typical quote from the Book of Solomonars, which we don't normally talk about much. But then there was also a quote from Esther Solomonar, who I theorize is Hannah's daughter, because she talks about like continuing her mother's work in writing down stories. And she says, I'm going to tell one final story. And then she tells us about the... I'm in the author's note. Hold on. And she says, but I have learned one thing from my mother. It's that sometimes stories have a way of telling themselves. Forgive me, I did the best I could. I will tell one last story. And then she talks about how there was a woman who lived in the mountains. And she had red hair. And she had all the same powers that Hannah had. And kind of like what happens in the mountains in that little group. It talks about the boys. Actually talks about when children are born with stars on their foreheads, which makes it sound like it happens more than once.
Yeah, how like it's an omen, you know.
Yeah, it's a thing that happens. Just that the traditions of the Solomonars carries on from this group in the mountains. And if you see a fox, it is an omen. It means there are wolves nearby. Was another one of the Romanian sayings. Anyway, it was very beautiful, like a little way to tie it up that we know that Hannah ended up okay and the boys ended up okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And were respected in that community.
Yes.
So.
We're hidden away, free from persecution.
Yeah. Yeah. A little bit about
very
the
beautiful.
dragons. And how they carry their books with them, but they also have them memorized. So, it's really nice to see that Hannah has become an important person.
Yes.
Through all of her suffering.
Yeah.
So. But what I really want to talk about is the author's note.
Yeah, that was very interesting.
It was. I kind of love that this story was launched out of Rena Rossner trying to learn more about her own family history and her grandmother who lit a candle in the closet. And she thought for sure that they were part of like one of the Jewish communities in Spain or Portugal because of the Spanish Inquisition. That was apparent. This is me learning something. I didn't realize that like Jews were persecuted in the midst of the Spanish Inquisition. It makes sense. Like, I just didn't know it.
I think pretty much any non-Catholic was, and even some Catholics were persecuted.
Right.
Know?
I just hadn't made that connection that would have been yet again another time where Jews were being persecuted.
No, same. It made total sense when I read it, but I was like, oh, I just never thought about that. Absolutely. But
right. Yeah. So she thought for sure that's why her mother her grandmother lit candles in the closet, but then it turned out that they didn't have any family history going back to Spain or Portugal, and it went to Romania, which she was very confused by. And in doing that research, she discovered all of these like Hasidic stories and fairy tales from that region, and thought that they all came together really nicely into this story, which is original, but does pull a lot on like local history and things from that region. Like Sarah Theodora was a real person, and not this version of her, but there is a Jewish convert who married Ivan Alexander and had children after his first wife, Theodora, disappeared or went away.
Yeah.
Like that was a real thing that happened in history.
And the guy that was the ruler of Wallachia, what do we say his name was? It's not. It's like Barsabi or something.
The Basarab character.
Basarab, yeah. Like him and the Black Dragon character may be conflated. They may be the same person, but that's also like a legendary figure from the area.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting because I also read in like the author blurb on the back, like dust jacket of the book, that she's like I think she majored in history or something in college. So it shows because she's quite the investigator, and she's dug up a lot of these like local history, local folklore things to feed into this story. It's just super interesting.
Yeah, she read a lot of stories about foxes, and also there was a like a mystical temple cave in the Sinkavechi forest, and
like Solomonars were like a real thing, like
but a different name. Called themselves Satmar after the city of Satummer, where their town,
weren't they like
where their rabbi came from.
I guess I'm also maybe I'm thinking about a different thing, but there were like certain Jews that lived in the mountains that like famously had red hair, right? That was a thing.
Yes.
I think that's
I may be looking at a different paragraph than what you're talking about. But yes, there's a along the way I also discovered another Romanian legend, the story of the Solomonars. I was looking at a different part. Another like sect of Judaism. Red-haired mountain men who could control the weather and who rode cloud dragons in the skies. Like there's a legend.
Yeah.
But sadly, they were also portrayed as caricatures of Jews and part of the anti-Semitic myth that Jews can control the weather. So, like, I love that how she's reclaiming these things that were, like, negatively impacting Jews at the time, reclaiming that and, like, making it into a beautiful story.
Yes, for sure.
That's cool. I do want to talk about the Black Mist, because that was never really, like, clarified what that was throughout the whole story.
Right. Right.
Like, we get bits and pieces of it. I do wish that would have been a little more resolved in story, but I understand why it wasn't. But basically, that was her, like, representation of Black Plague, Black Death, biblical leprosy, and also just, like, a metaphor for anti-Semitic views and ideology, which makes sense then.
And the reason why, like, because at first I didn't understand, like, what's this tie-in between like the Black Plague and anti-Semitism. Apparently, I didn't know this either. Apparently, Jewish people were blamed for the Black Plague in a lot of different areas.
And it like created many of the pogroms and violent attacks against the Jewish people.
Which reminds me
I also
of like
didn't know.
The first area they were in when the Black Mist hits the town and everyone's getting sick and everyone's blaming the Jews for it. I'm like, okay, this makes sense now.
Yeah. Now that I understand the metaphor, I'm like, oh, huh. Also, I just feel very. I don't know what the word is. I feel very sad that I was so ignorant to some of this. Like, I didn't know that Jews were blamed for the Black Death. And I didn't know that they were part of the victims in the Spanish Inquisition. And yeah, it's a lot more than just the Holocaust, right? Like,
Right.
they've been facing this persecution forever, and we just have ignored it, which is wrong.
Yeah, that was, I mean, it felt kind of convicting, you know?
Yeah.
Like, uh, I mean, history is what people choose to tell you,
Yeah.
you know? We don't
Mm-hmm.
we don't actually have time machines to go back and see what actually happened objectively. It is really, really
Mm-hmm.
hard to find historical sources that don't have any kind of bias. Uh, I mean, it's a classic line: history is told by the victors or the conquerors.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and historically, the people that are persecuted don't really have much opportunity to tell their side of things. So I'm sure a lot of that persecution gets kind of swept under the rug by people who don't want to admit that they were doing persecuting.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
so no, it was a really good kind of eye opener reading through that author's note for those things we talked about with like persecution and whatnot. I'd be really interested because I don't think it mentioned, but I'd be really interested to know what her area of expertise was for her history schooling. I'm sure that uh, that's researchable, but I would just be curious to know if it was actually in like Jewish history or if it was history of that specific area in like Eastern Europe or what. But
Yeah, it just says she's a graduate of, or that she has an MA in history from McGill University in Montreal, Canada.
see, I considered getting a history major at one point in my life
I
because
didn't know that.
I really liked history class.
Yeah.
In another life, if I could go back to school, I would maybe do that actually, but
Yeah. I mean,
I always could.
you could.
Be
I have a
expensive.
lot of I have a lot of mixed emotions about higher education, but as someone who's also considering going back and getting another degree,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to end with the last little bit of her author's note that she wrote because I thought it was very impactful.
First, do
That's
you want to
okay.
save that for like the very, very end, or do you have any other final thoughts you want to give about the book as a whole?
Um, well, the book as a whole. Um, I mean, I like retelling of fairy tales anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that this had a healthy dose of history in it and folklore from that area. I think that's important
Mm-hmm.
to like consider the roots of some of these stories. And I thought she did a really nice job tying it all together. I also liked the star aspect of it. I hadn't really thought about it as a Star of David, except maybe we talked about that briefly in like one of the early episodes.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd kind of forgotten about that connection until reading the author's note, and she mentioned how there was a story about the boys with stars on their heads. Like that's a bit of folklore, and it was interesting to see all that tie together too. So,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would say the writing style was very different in
Mm-hmm.
just like the way, like she was very creative with how she chose to tell the story through these first person blurbs, and some of them were like journal entries. There was a lot of poetry and a lot
Mm-hmm.
of just kind of like Stannis chapters were very much like typical first person,
Mm-hmm.
just more traditional narrative first person. But
Yeah.
it's been a while since I've read something in that perspective, so I was kind of it took a little bit to get back into it, but it
Yeah.
was good. I enjoyed it. Just the way that she can craft sentences.
Mm-hmm.
Rena Rossner, she is really gifted at like art makes you feel. She's
Mm-hmm.
she is she is an artist, like you can
Oh,
tell.
yes.
Um,
Yes.
she's a
Very much so.
historian and she's an artist, and she has found this perfect way to blend the two things together. And I think she should be proud of that. There, there was like things I do wish we could have gotten a little more of like a final, like just even like one final sentence about what ended up happening with Theodora. Also, we never really heard about their parents. Just that their dad kind of got back into,
Yeah.
it didn't get touched on too much though in like the last couple
Well,
sections.
yeah. I mean, I imagine they went with Hannah to the mountains.
Oh,
Like,
I don't.
I can't imagine that she left them behind.
I guess I don't remember if it explicitly said that they went with, but if it did, maybe I missed it. But if it didn't, I wish that it did.
Yeah, maybe I just assumed that when
Mm-hmm.
Hannah's telling Constantine that they have to leave,
Mm-hmm.
that they included her parents.
Yeah. No, it was very whimsical, mystical, dark. But no, overall well done. So
Yeah, yeah. I think you've summarized it well. I really liked the way that she braided the three sister stories together and how they each had a very unique voice.
yeah, yeah.
And you could very easily tell them apart.
And I think part of that comes with the different way that each of them writes also, or they read, like with the journal entries and Lavana's trippy / poetry moments.
Yeah.
No, you're right though. They both had they all had very unique voices, which made it easier to track.
Yeah. I would have maybe have liked to see like in the mountains what that actually looked like and like have actually seen a reunion between Gavriel and Hannah. But I also kind of like that we don't get that it's just speculation. And that's okay. So yeah, would 10 out of 10 recommend.
Yeah, especially if you're of Jewish heritage or faith. I think you would get even more from it than we did because you've like lived
Yes.
with these different like symbolisms in your life and just that upbringing. I think that you would glean even more from it than we did.
Yeah.
But no, very good for anyone to read. But
Yeah, I mean, it was enlightening for us and eye-opening in a lot of ways. So, yeah. And I like how she talked about storytelling throughout. Like, there was a little bit of meta
yeah,
in there, which I
especially
liked.
especially that Esther section and Hannah's
Yes.
last section.
Yes.
It kind of made it feel like Hannah wrote Light of the Midnight Stars,
Yes.
But
Yeah. So, on that note, unless you have anything else to add.
I'm good.
Okay. On that note, I wanted to end with the last little bit of the author's note, which I thought was very poignant. So she says, "My grandmother was a great storyteller, and my father is a storyteller too. Perhaps the passing on of that tradition, the way that we tell stories in order to make sense of our past, present, and future, is more important than where and how we light our candles, only that we must keep lighting them." So I thought that was very beautiful.
Even in the
It
author's note,
made me feel things.
she just can't help herself, man. Even in the author's note, she has to just craft these sentences that
I know. She has a real talent.
yeah.
She's an agent for writers. So let me start that over. So her like main job is that she's a literary agent, selling stories by authors, and I am so grateful that she has crossed over and also started writing her own books because she has beautiful stories to tell.
And her husband and 5 children live in Israel.
Yes.
Which is interesting.
She has her other book is also her debut novel is also very good, Sisters of the Winter Wood. So if you enjoyed this book, if you read along with us, if you want to keep reading by her, I would highly recommend that book as well. So.
Yeah. But once again, for the next read along book, go vote. Go become a patron if you want voting rights. The link's in the description. and we'll announce soon what that next book's going to be in about a week from the time you're hearing this, if you listen to it on the release day.
It's release day. Today is your day to sign up and vote.
Yes.
After today, voting will be closed. So,
oh, okay.
June 29th is the last day.
Okay, never mind. Okay, I got you.
And we will be announcing shortly thereafter.
Yes. So, now's the time to sign up really, really fast and go vote.
Yes.
So, yeah. But anyway, I guess until next time, happy reading.
And we'll talk to you next time.
Later.